Okay, hello. My name is Václav Muzika. I'm a Keycloak maintainer and a principal software engineer at Red Hat. And I will be talking about the declaratively configured Keycloak. It will be a little bit of follow-up on the Keycloak config CLI talk we had before from Francis. So, next slide, please. A few key points I will be touching on. In the first half, I will be talking more generically about what we assume to be, or what we imagine to be a good declarative configuration. What are the current limitations of it in Keycloak? What is the current state of it in Keycloak in general? And how it can be improved. And in the next half, I will be talking about what the Keycloak team is currently working on about this in this regard. So the first obvious question is, doesn't it Keycloak support already? Isn't Keycloak already possible? Isn't it possible to configure Keycloak declaratively? We saw in other tools, maybe in the Keycloak operator, or in the Keycloak config CLI before, that somewhat it is, but it is actually not, right? It is not possible to do it natively. So, but at first, let's take a step back and let's talk about why is it important and what we actually take it to be. So declarative configuration is configuration as a source, as a code. That means there is a single source of truth with some desired state that I want my key code to be, the desired state of the configuration of a realm. But at the same time, I don't want to be telling Keycloak how to apply this configuration. What steps does it need to do, right? And at the same time, I want to be able to change my mind at any point in time, anytime, right? I want to update my configuration and I want Keycloak to pick it up. I want it to figure it out, the rest, how it needs to be done. I want my configuration to be also portable without exporting, right? I want to just take my desired state and move it maybe to, I don't know, stage, dev environment. Maybe I want to just try some different keycode version, upgrade, something like that. And I also want to be able to leverage third-party tools. Maybe I want to store my desired state of configuration in GitHub or Git in general. I want to leverage GitOps. Maybe I want to have some extensive approvals flow, right? I want to use the operator. That's also a declarative configuration, right? Maybe I want to template my configuration, something like that. It's all third-party tools from the perspective of people, right? But yeah, next slide. So, and we can also see it in the recent survey we did around configuration management tools that there is a big demand around this. Lots of people are using various tools, so we need to support this. We need to be generic enough for this. So, what's the issue with that, right? Uh, the core issue is that the core issue is that there is only a single API for it right now, right? It's the REST API. Obviously, there are other ways how we can configure Keycloak, maybe via import, maybe via some, add config files or something like that. But it does not really allow to fully manage Keycloak. It's just a portion of it usually. It's not full, it's the actual operations. So, but okay, well, back again to the REST API. There is no real issue with that per se, right? But let's take a very simple example here. So I want to create a simple client with a simple client rule, right? Okay, I will create a client. That's one request. Okay, because I haven't specified a UUID, it's generated for me. And now what about the role? I have to do a second request, right? A completely different endpoint. And I also have to leverage the result of the previous request, to specify the UID of my newly created client. So for a simple thing as that, I have a client and this associated role, I have to do two requests. Not ideal. And I'm not talking even about when uh, I want to maybe create a client again, or what I want to say is that I have to know whether the client exists or not beforehand. I have to know the state in which the Keycloak is, right? I have to know because otherwise I have a conflict, right? And I cannot use other update methods because it would scream at me that the client does not exist, obviously. And there is also a question about how the representation looks like, right? These are very simple example of the client that we just created, right? I have created a client with just one field, client ID. And suddenly there is tons of different fields. What do they mean, right? What is the access field at the bottom? I haven't specified anything like that. So it's very confusing to me as a user because I'm specifying and I'm crafting this client, and suddenly it's something different that I have defined in my declarative configuration. So, okay, let's take a different example. I want to do something more difficult. I want to maybe create a client protocol mapper, right? Okay, let's assume that I have figured out by chance which endpoint it is. Okay, I have looked it up in the documentation. Okay, what does the documentation tell me? Okay, I have to look at some protocol mapper representation. Okay, the protocol, let's start with the protocol mapper representation. Okay, string, map of strings, config. What the hell I'm supposed to do here, right? Okay, I'm giving up. I'm giving up. I will just look at what the admin console is doing. I will open the web developer tools, and you know that's not good, really. Okay, next slide, please. So we can see that there are several issues with that. You know, single logical entity, like for example, client and its roles, requires to make several requests to Keycloak, right? And what's even worse, the API needs to understand the semantics of the API. The API client needs to understand the semantics of the API. It needs to understand that in order to create the role, it needs to create a client first, right? That's one of the problems. Obviously, the other problem is that it's poorly documented. That means there is very weak contract and it's extremely fragile for external API clients. The API is also inconsistent, it behaves differently in various endpoints. And there is no clear distinction between user provided values and the default values. That's what we saw in the GET request. What we've seen in the GET request. There is also it's also not very user friendly, hard to maintain. There are no validations on the endpoints. And there is also a resource ownership problem I will be talking a bit later about. Next slide, please. Okay, so how could we improve that? Right, there must be something that we can do. So just a small disclaimer here. Anything beyond this point is a sneak peek of a work in progress, basically a design that the Keycloak team is currently working on, and everything here is a subject to change. Okay, so what are our assumptions about the declarative API, right? We know that it should be backed by a relational database, right? Initially, we have considered leveraging the uh, file-based map store that was in the development back in the day, but due to other complexities and uncertainties, this has been decommissioned. So we know it will be standard database, right? No changes on the storage layer. We know that the API has to be idempotent. That means that no matter how many times I call the API, no matter how many times I apply my desired state, it will get the same result. It will be stateless from the client perspective. That means that the client should not really care about the state the talk is in. It should not really need to fetch anything, right? It just will take the desired state, it will throw it at Keycloak, and Keycloak should figure out, do I need to create it, update it, what do I need to do with that? Right? The API should be also generic enough, it should be client agnostic, right? It's not tailored for operator or anything else. It should be generic. We also we want it to be user friendly, have a great design for the data transfer objects, great structure. We've seen it. It's not ideal. We assume that the objects will be handcrafted, right? It's not something that should be managed only by machines. If I store my Kiko configuration in a GitOps Git repository, I should be able to understand it, right? Or maybe create it from scratch. It should be cloud native friendly. What I mean is that it should support uh, distributed systems when I have more than one Keycloak instance. It obviously should be usable at runtime. I don't want to restart my Keycloak just to pick up pick up the desired state. And there should also be the clear ownership of declaratively configured resources. That means that it should be very clear to Keycloak which resources are coming from this declarative API and which resources are coming from maybe something else like admin console. So the first intuition here would be, what's these files, right? Let's make Keycloak to read files, watch files, right? Directly, right? And apply them to the database. But there are actually several issues with that, right? So one of the questions is, when are the files loaded exactly? Is it on startup? Yeah, we've said already. We want it to be runtime, right? Is it actively watched by Keycloak? Okay, I assume so, right? But what about the distributed problem? What about the distributed systems? If I have multiple Keycloak instances, what will happen, right? Because it might happen and it is very probable. But at some point in time, one Keycloak instance will have different files as the other Keycloak instance. Maybe Kubernetes is taking some time, to update the files on each pod or something like that, right? So what will happen? Keycloak will be fighting with each other, or will we have to implement some leader election, right? So it's not an ideal approach, and this is not something that we will do initially. Obviously, it does not mean that it won't come later, but not as part of initial plan. So the next idea is obviously next slide. REST API, right? Again. But it would obviously mean that it will have to be a completely new API built from ground up. But we've seen that the REST API is not good, right? So can we do it better? If we think about it, a well-designed REST API ticks all the boxes for the declarative configuration. It's idempotent, stateless, client agnostic. It can be user-friendly if we designed it the way. It should be obviously cloud native friendly. Runtime support is there, right? And it's something that we know at Keycloak. It's something that Keycloak already does well, apart from the design, obviously, right? We know how to secure the API, right? It's not new. And, at the end of the day, we know that the admin REST API needs a revamp, right? So why not take it as an opportunity for it? So here I will be talking about a few key points. The new API should be obviously stateless from the client perspective. That means that the client should not know anything about the current code state, as I mentioned. It should not need to fetch the resources. For that, we need the logical units, the logical resources in Keycloak will be a single resource, like client and client roles as an instance. And the API should also support a single HTTP verb for creating and updating. As I mentioned, client should not care whether the resource exists or not. This will ensure idempotency and also obviously it will override the resource if it exists, create it if it does not. Another concept, next slide please, is the access control. This is the resource ownership problem, right? So let's assume this scenario. I have created maybe an client inside Keycloak, and I have used the admin console for that. Then I have created a very similar client in the declarative config source, maybe in the Git, right? With the same client ID, right? What happens now? Will it take ownership? Will it update it? Right? This would be a security nightmare. So we will have to have a clear resource ownership of each resource that is created this way. So Keycloak will know this specific client was created by, let's say, GitOps, right? And it will allow it to manage only the clients that were created by the GitOps, right? This will obviously require some enhancements for the fine-grained admin permissions, but again, it's something similar that we already have there. Obviously, the declarative config server will use service accounts for authentication, and the service account will be tied with each resource created this way. And there is also the problem with the defaults, right? There is basically a fight between the explicit defaults that are added by Keycloak and the declarative configuration, the desired state, because I have a desired state and now it's somehow enriched by Keycloak. There's a mismatch, right? So obviously, we will have to tackle this as well. Uh, we currently assume that not all defaults will be persisted, and some of them will be resolved on runtime internally, at runtime internally. This will also ensure cleaner get results for the user, right? It's not strictly needed for the declarative configuration API, but it's good for the API overall. So now you may ask how the files fit into that, right? All I've been talking about is the REST API, right? So the REST API is basically an abstraction above the files, right? Keycloak won't be managing the files directly initially at the moment. So there will be always an external syncer sorts of, and this syncer can be anything. It could be the operator reading the CRs. It could be maybe the Keycloak config CLI we've seen, right? Something like that. And it will be watching the files, reading the files, and just calling the Keycloak API. The difference here is that the syncer should really not contain much logic. The most difficult part there will be really just authentication to Keycloak, nothing more, right? It should just blindly call the APIs. Now there is a question of the operator CRs. That's the one of the main motivations for it, because in the new operator we don't currently have the CRs we had in the old operator. So this is one of the main motivations. So operator is just another syncer, right? The CRDs for it will be generated from the API representations. That means that it will be one-to-one match, automatic, no manual syncing, and it will support initially only client CR at the moment. So to sum it up, new REST API will be in development for the native declarative configuration. There will be also new representations for that, for the resources. And eventually this API will become baseline for the new REST API. And the operator CRs will be leveraging this. So what's next? We are currently prototyping a proof of concept around this in the team. The goal is to create sort of a blueprint for the ideal API, how it should look like, how it should work, right? Then the next step will be a production-ready MVP covering selected use cases, not all use cases at the beginning, the most prominent use cases for the client, and it will be focus this API on the declarative configuration and the operator CI. And iteratively after that, we will be extending the API, right? More endpoints, more resources, right? And eventual goal is that it will become the REST API, admin REST API version 2. So how to get involved? There is a discussion on GitHub. You have to remember 33049 for that, and you can provide your feedback there. There is also you can also find us on the CNCF Slack, and you can also leverage the Keycloak graph mailing list. Obviously, all updates here be also sent to the proper channels. So we will be communicating the status of this. Okay, so that's it from me. Thank you for this opportunity and for your attention. And do you have any questions or feedback around this?
So first of all, thank you for the great talk. And working on a similar issue on documents description. And on the one hand, you have always two sides: the full-fledged configuration of something, like you already mentioned, for the client, all the parameters, and so on and so on. So what looking forward to implementing by myself is like a minimal view. So what's necessary? Then the next one would be add please the defaults to this configuration. And then at the end, I would say, hey, what's even possible in the whole configuration? So is this something you're looking forward to as well here in the POC, or is this something more down the line?
In the POC, we are focusing on being it really user friendly. So I can't say really in details yet. It's all in development. That's why the prototype is here, right? As I mentioned, we have to still figure out, for example, how the defaults will behave. It's not something that we have already. We know that it's not ideal, right? The full-fledged implementation there, the full-fledged representation there. So I would say that it would be something that will be tackled by the prototype and by this MVP, possibly.
Okay, thank you.
So any other questions?
Yeah, me again. I'm gonna reiterate what I asked the Francis before. How about configuring it at the startup without having to have a user? Like I want to create the admin user that later administrates with a declarative config.
Oh yeah, so yeah, in Keycloak 26, I don't think it has been released yet. There is a brand new bootstrapping around admin. It has been streamlined. You can create even service account this way if you don't need a full-fledged user account for that. So it will be aligned with this. But you know, this bootstrapping is already there, or it will be there in Keycloak 26.
Oh, okay, great.
Thank you. So, I just want to share a thought with you. There are different competitors to Keycloak, and some of them are already solving this issue. But Keycloak always had its strong point on its user interface and the easy way to configure it manually. So, I really like the idea, and it might be awesome to have some generate config from my manual change button in the UI, because I think that having this UI is one of the big strong points of Keycloak.
Mhm.
So just a thought.
Yeah, obviously, we are thinking about it in a way that the new representations should somehow be aligned with the UI, at least in the terminology, right? It should not, it should feel similar to the user, and he should understand it the same way. You know, if I'm coming from UI, I should understand also the declarative config. You know, that's the idea, exactly.
There's one question from the internet from Lucas. He's asking when are we about to expect the first minimum viable product of this?
Mhm. So I would say in the next like we are estimating in the next 6 months. No promises. It's just an estimate.
Sorry, we need to complete the questions. So thank you
Thank you.
so much.